Hi, this is Bob Wells here, and welcome to Undercurrent Stories. This is the show where we hear about people's interests and uncover some fascinating stories at the same time. I hope you enjoy today's show. Hi, it's Bob Wells here, and welcome to another episode of Undercurrent Stories podcast. Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? Have you got a particular interest that you would like to share with the world? Well, today's show is all about starting a podcast. I was recently interviewed by Lee Wellbrook from the U3A for their show. U3A is a UK-wide collection of 1,000 plus charities that provide the opportunity for those no longer in work to come together and learn for fun. In the conversation, we talk about what resources are available to help you get started, the equipment required, and how you can upload your very first episode. So, if you're inspired to start your own show, I hope you enjoy this episode and find it helpful.
Hello, I'm Peter Clift, and I would like to welcome you to the April 2024 edition of the U3A Podcast. One of the great things about a podcast is that you can listen to it at any time of the day, or indeed the night, whether it's light or dark. And in this podcast, we have plenty for you to enjoy. But have you ever thought of producing your very own podcast? Well, one U3A member who's done just that is Bob Wells from Stanford U3A. Bob runs his own podcast, and Lee Wellbrook caught up with him and began by asking him how he got into podcasting.
Well, it was interesting, actually. I was on a work course away for a few days. One of my colleagues said to me, "Do you ever listen to podcasts?" And I said, "Well, no, I don't really." He said, "Well, have a go." So there and then I downloaded one of the podcast apps, and I was hooked. And, I had particular interests in making beer, in history, playing music, listening to music and all that sort of stuff. What I liked about them was the fact that you could take a sort of deep dive into a particular niche, roll on to 2020, and then the world stopped. But I was actually quite fortunate in as much as I was furloughed with my company. And I had this sort of spare time. I think I was off for about 11 weeks altogether. And I'd always had a sort of inkling about, actually, I wouldn't mind doing a podcast, but never sort of had the gall to actually go out and set it up. So I started looking into it, and then I thought, like a lot of things in life, just get cracking on it. Don't spend too much time thinking about it and planning it. Just do it, and it'll probably be, you'll learn along the way, and that's what I did. And then, you come up to now 2024, March 2024, and I released my 100th episode last week. I started off doing them fortnightly back in 2020, 21 and 22. And then halfway through 2022, I retired from corporate life. And I thought, what am I going to do now? So apart from joining U3A, which I really enjoy, I started releasing them every week. And here we are. That's really how it all started, Lee.
Did you have any background in broadcasting before you leapt into running your own podcast?
No, I didn't. I didn't have a background in broadcasting as such, but I have always enjoyed sort of performing to a certain extent. So I've played music in bands for about 45 years, and I do have quite a bit of experience presenting. And so I didn't have a particular shyness for getting my voice heard.
To get yourself started, presumably you had to get various bits of technology together. So was that expensive? Was that difficult? And maybe you can tell us a little bit about the technology and the equipment that you needed to get together to start recording your podcasts.
Well, the first thing I would say is if anybody's interested in starting a podcast, it's not expensive. All you need is a computer. You need preferably an external microphone rather than the inherent microphone that's within the computer. And then from there on, you need to have a platform that you can record on. So we're currently recording on Zoom. There are other platforms like Riverside or Zencaster. I tend to use Riverside, which is similar to Zoom. And then you need to do some editing to cut out all the ums and coughs and people who have to go to the door to receive an Amazon delivery and all that sort of thing. I use a free one, which is very, very popular, called Audacity. Then you need to be able to upload it onto the web. So you need to be on platforms like Spotify and Apple and Amazon. I use a platform called Buzzsprout. You basically record your interview, you do the editing, you produce it, and then you send it off to the platform. And then they distribute it via what is known as an RSS. That then distributes your podcast to all those different platforms. So that's for remote interviews I've been talking about. There's also live interviews, which I do. And I use another microphone for that. It's called a Rode Broadcaster, which is one mic that I take around with me and talk to people. We've done a couple of live ones where I've gone to people's houses. We did a history one in the town of Stamford where I live. What I like about the live ones is you can get the sights and the sounds of traffic, for example, and car horns, and which gives it a bit more of a natural ambience to the interview. So I quite like doing live ones.
Is there any sort of website? Are there any sort of guides out there that can also help people to get started in podcasting?
If you just go into Google and put how to start a podcast, you'll get reams of stuff. Some sites will give you an idea about what you need to do, which will vary from others. So it's good to get a broad sort of macro view of it first. So you've got that. You've got podcasts starting podcasts themselves. So you can actually go in, search in your app in Spotify or what, how to start a podcast, and you'll find lots of podcasts about how to start a podcast. There's books. There's a book I got called Make Noise by a guy called Eric Nussum. He was one of the first podcasters when they first started going out in the sort of mid-noughties. There's Facebook forums. There's one I belong to, which is called Buzzsprout, where you can ask simple questions like, how do I edit my podcast? How do I upload it? And stuff like that. So there's an awful lot of stuff. And there's books you can buy. You can go into your local bookshop or Amazon and search how to start a podcast. And if you've got any listeners who, just want a quick couple of minute email thing, they're always very welcome to send me an email, and I can guide them in that respect.
That would be very helpful, actually, Bob. So thank you very much for that. The bit we haven't actually talked about is your podcast. And I'd be interested to know who you've interviewed, what kind of topics you cover, and also where can we find it?
Well, the podcast has been going, as I say, for about 4 years now. But I deliberately started it off to cover a lot of topics. It's called Undercurrent Stories. And our guests tend to be people who've got a particular passion for an interest that they do, whether that's a job, whether it's an interest that they do on the side or their full-time hobby or whatever. And also the word undercurrent sort of tends to say that it's stuff that you'll hear on the podcast that isn't necessarily in the headlines, in the mainstream media. We cover a wide range of topics. We've got stuff on history. We've got stuff about volunteering. We've got stuff about retirement. We interview musicians. We've interviewed scientists, biology, mathematics. We interview quite a lot of authors. So to give you an example of some of the names, people will probably remember a band called Thin Lizzy. I interviewed Eric Bell, the guitarist. You probably remember a song, I'm Too Sexy, by Right Said Fred. So they were a great pair to interview. And authors-wise, we've had Tony Riches, who is an author of Tudor fiction. On mathematics, we had a guy called Rob Easterway. And then we do things like endurance and stuff. So we've had Serena Brocklebank, who followed in her grandfather's footsteps, and she's actually been up Everest twice. We've had another guy, Dion Barrett, who runs a volunteer project called the North Star Project. He came from gangland culture in London, brought up, single mother, fell in with gangs, went on holiday once to the Lake District with his grandmother and suddenly discovered the outdoors, came back a renewed person, joined the army. His mission is to help people from the inner cities, to particularly children, to go out and discover the outdoors. We've had another guy, Stuart Hill. He was an officer in the British Army, and he got blown up in Afghanistan, almost died, severe brain injury, and his story is all about recovering from that. Hopefully you've seen that we do an awful lot of stuff.
Just to recap on that, if anybody wants to find your podcast, if they look for Undercurrent Stories, they should be able to find it.
Yes, they should.
Wonderful stuff. Bob, thank you very much for your time, and I hope that will inspire some of our members to at least listen to your podcast and maybe actually start up their own. So thank you very much for your time.
Great talking to you, Lee. Thank you.
You have been listening to Undercurrent Stories. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to share the show link to your friends and family, and if you have 60 seconds, I will be most grateful if you would please rate and review. To hear more episodes, please subscribe to the show and visit undercurrentstories.com. If you leave your email in the link, we will notify you as soon as new episodes are released. Also, check out our social media links, details of which can be found on the show notes. Until next time, this is Bob Wells wishing you all the very best.